Hi everyone, this is the dispatch for Tuesday, April 21st. Our reading begins with Psalm 114, again as it did yesterday. And our second reading is from the book of Jonah. It's a small book in the section of the Minor Prophets in the Old Testament, but it is a familiar story. Of course, Jonah, who gets called to prophesy to the city of Nineveh to tell them about how wicked they are, decides to run from God, ends up on a ship. The ship is in a storm. The ship's crew discover that Jonah is the cause of the storm, so they throw him overboard. And he, of course, then spends 3 nights in the belly of a whale. Oh, actually, it's a large fish. We often say it's a whale. I think the reason that this text is a part of the lectionary right now is because Jesus speaks of the sign of Jonah, that he will go, as Jonah was in the belly of a fish for 3 days and 3 nights, so Jesus will be dead for 3 days, right? And then, of course, Easter. So that's maybe the connection and why we have it in the lectionary during this season. But there's some interesting things about this story to pay attention to. One of a commentator who writes about this particular story says this, that sending an Israelite to preach in Nineveh in the 8th century BC is a little like sending a Jew to preach in Berlin in the 1930s. Short of a stupendous miracle, the prospect of success is not high, and a forlorn, gruesome death looks much more likely. So there's good reason that Jonah would have been afraid. But what's interesting is that God is sending Jonah to Nineveh for the good of Nineveh, right? To try to help these people who are outsiders. They're not Jews. And if you look at the story of Jonah on the boat, which is the focus of this passage, you'll notice that the people on the boat, the crew, who are also outsiders, they're also not Jews, they regret having to send Jonah overboard. They recognize it as the will of God, and then they fear God. They worship God as a result. So Jonah, trying to run from God's intention to do good to outsiders, still ends up doing good to outsiders, still ends up enacting God's purpose, which is a really fascinating glimpse at how God works, right? God can even use us and our cowardice, our desire to run away from what God is calling us to do. God can even use that for God's purposes, which is a wonderful part of this story. And then moving on to 1 Corinthians chapter 15, our third look at this chapter, and we're only halfway through. It's a long chapter. Feel free to continue reading, but again, Paul is talking about the resurrection. And here he's forward-looking. He's taking the resurrection of Christ. He talks about it as the first fruits, and he's looking forward to the resurrection of all. He says that for as all die in Adam, so all will be made alive in Christ. He says the last enemy to be destroyed is death. He'll go on to say those famous words, "Where, O death, is your sting? Where your victory, O grave?" It's a wonderful chapter, so read the whole thing. One quick update, a reminder that tomorrow at 10 a.m. we'll be having our next session discussing the book Simply Jesus by N.T. Wright. You're invited to join us even if you didn't join us last week. I will send out an email Wednesday morning, tomorrow morning, with the link that you need to join our Zoom conversation. And if you think you might have any trouble getting in, send me an email with all of your worries and concerns, and I'll help make sure you have everything lined up so that you can participate with us tomorrow. That's it for today. Have a great day, and we'll see you tomorrow.